Hello and welcome to another video brought to you by the Brightx AI Accelerator team at Samsung SDS. My name is Patrick, and today I'm going to be telling you about a data science workflow and the management aspects associated with that. The data science workflow has these 7 stages, of which the middle 5 are concerned with the scientific aspects of making an AI model. I've discussed those in a separate video, so I encourage you to watch that. Today, I want to talk about the first and the last step in the workflow, which are the managerial aspects and the communicative aspects, where we discover, first of all, what is the task that we're trying to solve with AI, and in the end, the step of change management, where we're convincing users to actually adopt this new technology and therefore change their way of living and operating. Most of the frustration in the AI workflow lies in the very beginning, where we define what the problem is. If you're either too vague about that definition, or you don't communicate enough with all the stakeholders, then you might identify something to be the task that isn't the actual problem you're trying to solve. Much later in the workflow then, you will discover that you're solving a problem that nobody had, and that the actual problem that people do have hasn't been solved. And then you have to go back to the beginning. And that can be very frustrating. Having done that correctly, gone through the process, at the very end, change management poses the most risk in the entire workflow, for the simple reason that we find very often users are saying no thank you to the final AI system that's being deployed. So we have to find ways to involve them early enough in the process and to motivate them so that they're actually interested in the solution that you're developing here. So let me address the first point in somewhat more detail. We need to define what the problem is. A few blind people are brought to an elephant and asked, "What is this?" And so, since they cannot see the elephant, they have to touch the elephant. And one person touches the trunk and says, "This is like a snake." Another person touches the main body and says, "Oh, this is like a wall." Another person touches the leg and says, "This is like a tree." And so none of them are able to give a complete description of the situation. They all give partial descriptions, and somebody else will need to assemble this to come up with a true scenario of what the elephant as a whole is like. And each of the stakeholders in an AI project are seeing a myopic view on what they want out of the solution, or what they think the problem is. But if you ask 3 people, you're likely to get 4 opinions. And so you need to ask many people about their input and really discover where is the true problem. It's most often not where you think it is in the first instance. And so what's the situation that we find ourselves in with this task? What is the problem we're trying to solve? What data is it that we have, and how good is that data? What's the solution look like? What does the AI need to provide to the users to solve whatever problem it is? Who are the users? Who has to participate in the process by either delivering a piece of data or information, or in the end being willing to actually adopt that technology? What's the timeline, right? When does it have to be ready? Do we have enough time to do all of this? Do we have enough budget to accomplish those tasks? And then we need to come up with a plan on what to do. Oftentimes this process is cut short, and we just sort of ask the manager, so what do you want us to do? Here it is. Okay, I'm going to go away and run with it. And that's when the project goes haywire. So my recommendation to everybody out there pursuing an AI project, it is this task definition that is absolutely crucial. If you spend enough time on this with enough people, then you will get a very precise definition of what the problem is, and it will typically look very different than the first opinion that you might have gathered from a single individual. And that will underpin the rest of the workflow and make your project a lot more likely to be a success. Now, here's a kind of comical portrayal of what some of these project management approaches look like. At the top left, you see how the customer explained the challenge. This is very typical that the customer is not actually able to articulate correctly what the problem is. That's why you need to dive deep and talk to various people to discover what the challenge is. And of course, there's a communication problem. So the second picture is how the project leader understood it. Even if the customer describes something, the project leader doesn't necessarily understand all of what's been said. Then there is further communication issues like how the analyst designed it, how the programmer wrote it, and then what the testers received, of course, is something else again. And the sales department, the business consultant, of course, describes it as a much more fantastic thing than it actually turns out to be. Documentation is a challenge, right? Even the communication aspects of what's the problem needs to be documented. And the installation needs to reflect what's been constructed. Now, the customer, of course, is most frustrated always with the invoicing of the system. And so you mustn't bill the customer for something that's vastly more grandiose than what's actually been done. Frequent challenge for IT systems is support. And so we have to be able to offer some support with this. Now, again, the communication aspect of marketing wants to display something much more fancy than is the actual capability. But in the end, we should be focusing on what the customer actually needed, rather than, in the first picture here, what the customer explained that he wants. So, in this process of communication at the very beginning, our real challenge is to tease out what does the customer really need? What is the problem that he's trying to solve? What would a solution look like to this problem? And then we can typically shortcut many of these issues and cut straight to the problem and implement that. Now, data science typically focuses on the data scientist, which is a person who is mathematically trained, who writes computer programs to treat data. And this person is the focus of data science. Actually, that's quite wrong. Data science is a team sport, and that team does include data scientists, but it also includes many other people. Data scientists are in the plural in this team as well. There is not just a single data scientist, but typically several of them. You also need domain experts, people who understand the situation or the problem that we're in. So if you're doing healthcare, you're going to need doctors. If you're going to do autonomous driving, you need vehicle engineers. If you're going to do natural language processing, you need native speakers of whatever language you're dealing with, and so on and so forth. Management is, of course, involved in order to properly conduct the project. They need to supply the people and the budget and the environment to do this. They typically own the data. And you need to have the users involved as well, so that at the very end of the process, they're actually aware of what's been done, and they were given a chance to provide their input into how the solution needs to look, not just that it's scientifically accurate, but that it actually becomes usable in the daily life of the end user. So you need all these people to be present and actively contributing, and that's why I say data science is in fact a team sport and not an activity for an individual data scientist to do in their cubicle. Risk management, of course, is an important part of a project like this. There are a multitude of risks, but the internal risks are mainly about time, money, and people. How much is it going to cost? What is the benefit of this AI solution? who's going to have to support this and provide something to it, and what can possibly go wrong to make the costs larger, the benefits less, the scientific accuracy or deliverable a little less good. And of course, there are a multitude of external risks and challenges involved. The prime one that's currently getting a lot of traction is, of course, ethical. AI ethics being a very important topic to make sure that the use case we're pursuing is in fact amenable to AI, and of course that the data doesn't contain any bias that we're implicitly training the AI to have and perpetuate. So all this needs to be checked out in the beginning. Of course, there needs to be a business case in the sense that the cost and the benefit need to be weighted appropriately, that there is more benefit than cost in this project altogether. All these things can be put together, identified, written up, and submitted for the initial assessment on the plan on what we're going to do in this AI project. Now, everything I've said up till now is that first step of communication, of figuring out what the task is. And this should happen before we go through the scientific steps of actually training an AI to do anything. So that first step is actually a very significant step. After you've done that, and let's assume you've done the AI training as well, comes the change management aspect of the process, by which the end users are provided with the AI and asked to basically change the way they behave, incorporating this new model in their workflows. You need many tasks and people in AI, and all these people are needed, communication is needed to drive the project forward. Users are among them, so you should not leave change management to the very end of the project, but rather the people who are going to need to change should be involved throughout the process of the project, so that not only do they know what's going on, but they were able to provide their input on how they need things to be usable, and they felt heard, they felt involved, so that later on they actually feel happy about using the tool. Users often have very different requirements than management, in the sense that management, of course, needs the AI to be accurate and to work appropriately and to have no biases and things like this. The end users want different things. The end users might want good graphics, an easy-to-use user interface, a fast response time when they click the button. Things like that might be important to the end users, and so it's important to the team to communicate with them as early in the process as possible. We're aware as people that change is often seen as a bad thing, and so we need to communicate early on what's going to happen so that people are involved in the change making and then actually see change as an opportunity rather than as something risky and bad. There is a psychological transformation that often occurs in people's minds when a new challenge is proposed to them or a new situation is proposed to them. It might start with anxiety of, what other aspects of my life is this going to change? For example, is my job at risk? I very often find in AI projects, because AI typically automates something, that people are afraid that they are being automated away, that they'll get fired in the end because AI is going to just simply take over their job. So anxiety is a big point in this. There might be a rise in the psychological curve in the sense that, hey, finally my organization is changing. There is something new coming in. Is there progress? And then, of course, the progress is limited and people become afraid that this is going to have a negative impact after all. The AI starts becoming perhaps a threat, again, a threat to the job, a threat to the way of life that they've been leading so far, a threat that further things are going to change. And then people might even start to feel bad about what they've been doing thus far and ceasing to participate in the process, or thinking, okay, how do I fit into this new organization that's changed? Oftentimes people say, we've been doing it like this for 50 years and let's just continue this way. This new fancy schmancy AI technology is not really helping. And then you get people who are not participating in the process anymore. They're saying this isn't for me. And that's the threat of change management gone wrong, namely the new scientifically accurate and well done AI system is not being used. That's the reason why I say change management is such a source of AI failures, because people simply say, I'm disillusioned with this, I'm not going to use it. And at that point, no matter how good your AI is, the project is over. You need to convince people then to get through the valley of tears and get to accept the new status quo. And the best way to get people on board is to have them climb that staircase with you. Get them involved in the beginning, ask for their opinion, ask for them to be involved, and then they have a skin in the game, they have a stake in the project, and they will help you actually get that up the ladder and see a new future for themselves in this, and then actually be happy moving forward. So anybody who's going through an AI project, I can only encourage you to get involved in the change management procedure as early as possible in order to overcome some of these challenges and to get the end users on board. Having said that, I want to point out that change management, of course, itself is a task and therefore requires people to do it and time and money to do it with. So change management is another aspect in the workflow that needs to be budgeted for, and management needs to realize that the AI project doesn't consist of only AI, it consists of more than that, and so they need to budget the appropriate resources to make that happen. So of course, we are in the business of the AI workflow. If you have any questions, please reach out to us on LinkedIn, over the YouTube channel. Please like the video and subscribe to our channel for more content. Thank you very much for your attention, and goodbye.